Michael Dabkowski's murder. As the Albuquerque police sifted through the grisly contents of Randall Apostolon's truck in early March 2021, Sean Lannon was already 2,000 miles away, stepping off a plane in Philadelphia with his 3 children in tow. The bodies of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller, and Randall Apostolon lay undiscovered in the Sunport parking garage, but Sean's mind was elsewhere. His rampage wasn't over. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of East Greenwich, New Jersey, a final name lingered on his list: Michael Dabkowski, a 66-year-old man who'd once been Sean's mentor. What unfolded in Dabkowski's home would be the last act in Sean's bloody spree, a murder rooted in a decades-old grudge that would tie his crimes together and bring him one step closer to capture. Michael Dabkowski was a respected figure in South Jersey, a man known for his involvement in Big Brothers Big Sisters, the mentorship program where he'd met a young Sean Lannon in the 1980s. Back then, Dabkowski was in his late 20s, a charismatic volunteer who took Sean fishing, helped with homework, and offered guidance to a boy from a modest family. To the community, he was a pillar, generous, dependable, the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back. But Sean, years later, painted a darker picture. In court, he claimed Dabkowski had sexually abused him starting at age 14, a trauma that festered into adulthood, fueling his rage. No evidence, police reports, witnesses, or records ever substantiated these claims, and investigators found them dubious. Yet, whether true or a fabrication to justify his actions, this alleged betrayal was the spark for Sean's final killing. On March 8, 2021, just days after leaving Albuquerque, Sean arrived in East Greenwich, a small town where Dabkowski lived alone in a tidy single-story home. He knew the place well. As a teen, he'd spent countless hours there, and he still had a key, a relic from those mentorship days. Under the cover of night, he let himself in, moving silently through the familiar rooms. Dabkowski, now retired and living a quiet life, was caught off guard. Sean's later confession described a confrontation, though the details were vague. He claimed he went to retrieve compromising photos from his childhood, but prosecutors saw it differently, a calculated act of vengeance. The weapon was a sledgehammer, the same kind used on Randall Apostolon. Sean struck Dabkowski repeatedly, the blows shattering bone and splattering blood across the living room. The 66-year-old didn't stand a chance. His body crumpled to the floor, left where it fell. Sean didn't linger long. He rifled through Dabkowski's belongings, taking his wallet, keys, and a silver SUV parked in the driveway. The theft was practical. Sean needed a way to keep moving, but it was also reckless. Unlike the meticulous cover-up in Grant's, where he dismembered bodies and hidden them in totes, this murder was messy, impulsive. Blood stained the carpet, and Sean made no effort to clean it up. He drove off in Dabkowski's SUV, leaving the body for someone to find. It was a bold move for a man who'd evaded suspicion for weeks, but his luck was running out. The next day, March 9th, a neighbor noticed Dabkowski's absence and called for a welfare check. Police entered the home and found the gruesome scene. Dabkowski, bludgeoned to death, his house a silent witness to Sean's rage. The East Greenwich murder sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. Dabkowski's friends were stunned. He'd been a beloved figure with no known enemies. But the stolen SUV gave police a lead. License plate readers and traffic cameras tracked the vehicle moving west, and New Jersey investigators quickly connected the dots to Sean Lannon, a name already tied to Jennifer's disappearance in New Mexico. Word of the Albuquerque truck discovery was spreading, and on March 10th, the pieces fell into place. Sean was no longer just a person of interest. He was a fugitive wanted for 5 murders across 2 states. His claim of 16 total victims, later revealed in interrogations, added a chilling layer to the manhunt. Was he a serial killer exaggerating his body count, or were there more bodies yet to be found? Dabkowski's murder stood out from the others. It wasn't about drugs or covering tracks, like the killings in Grants. It was personal, tied to a past Sean couldn't let go. Whether his abuse allegations were true or a delusion fueled by methamphetamine and paranoia, they drove him to cross a continent to kill. The stolen SUV became his undoing, a breadcrumb trail leading police closer. As Sean fled west, unaware of the net tightening around him, the families of his victims were left grappling with grief. In New Jersey, Dabkowski's loved ones mourned a man they saw as a saint, while in New Mexico, the discovery of the truck was about to break wide open, exposing the full scope of Sean Lannon's horrors. Sean Lannon's capture and confession. By March 10, 2021, Sean Lannon was a ghost on the run, slipping through the cracks of 2 states with the blood of 5 victims on his hands. The gruesome discovery of 4 bodies in a pickup truck at the Albuquerque International Sunport had sent shockwaves through New Mexico. While in East Greenwich, New Jersey, the murder of Michael Dabkowski had left a quiet community reeling. But Sean, now 47, wasn't slowing down. Driving a stolen silver SUV taken from Dabkowski's driveway, he was heading west, a fugitive fueled by methamphetamine and a desperate need to stay one step ahead of the law. Yet, the noose was tightening. From New Mexico to New Jersey, police were piecing together the trail of a killer, and Sean's reckless choices were about to catch up with him in a dramatic confrontation that would unravel his web of violence. After killing Dabkowski on March 8, Sean had fled New Jersey in the stolen SUV, his 3 children left with relatives in Philadelphia. His destination was unclear. Perhaps he was heading back to New Mexico, or maybe he was simply running blind, driven by paranoia and the high of meth. But the SUV was a fatal mistake. License plate readers and traffic cameras, tools of a modern manhunt, tracked the vehicle as it crossed state lines. New Jersey police, alerted to Dabkowski's murder and the stolen car, shared the information with federal authorities. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, the discovery of the truck had put Sean's name at the top of the suspect list. Jennifer Lannon's family had long suspected him in her disappearance, and now, with 4 bodies linked to him, the U.S. Marshals Service was on high alert. Sean was no longer just a person of interest, he was one of the most wanted men in America. On March 10, in St. Louis, Missouri, the hunt came to an end. U.S. Marshals, acting on a tip from license plate data, spotted Dabkowski's SUV parked outside a nondescript motel. Sean was inside, alone, his gaunt face and bloodshot eyes betraying days of sleeplessness and drug use. As marshals surrounded the motel, guns drawn, Sean surrendered without a fight. The man who'd killed 5 people in a matter of weeks stepped out with his hands raised, his expression unreadable. Handcuffed and loaded into a patrol car, he was a far cry from the unassuming father and handyman he'd once been in Grants. The arrest was swift, almost anticlimactic, but what followed would send chills through investigators and the public alike. In a St. Louis interrogation room, Sean began to talk. His confession, recorded over hours, was a mix of cold calculation and wild bravado. He admitted to the murders of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller, Randall Apostolon, and Michael Dabkowski. He described luring his victims, shooting or bludgeoning them, and dismembering 3 of them with a saw in his Grants garage. He said he had to clean up my messes, his voice flat, as if discussing a routine chore. But then came the bombshell. Sean claimed he'd killed 16 people in total, 15 in New Mexico and 1 in New Jersey. The number stunned detectives. Beyond the 5 confirmed victims, there was no evidence of additional bodies, no missing persons reports that matched his claims. Was he exaggerating to inflate his infamy,
Or were there more victims hidden in the desert waiting to be found? Investigators scrambled to verify his story, but the trail went cold. The claim of 16 victims remains unproven to this day, a haunting question mark in the case. Sean's confessions revealed a man teetering between remorse and manipulation. He spoke of his meth addiction, his broken marriage, and his belief that his victims had wronged him. Jennifer, he said, had betrayed him through the divorce. Justin and Matthew were tied to drugs or her new life. Randall was a threat who asked too many questions. Dabkowski, he insisted, had abused him as a teen, a claim that, like his 16-victim boast, lacked evidence. Yet there were moments of eerie clarity. He described the dismemberment process in detail, admitting to using plastic totes to keep things tidy. He'd planned to move the bodies permanently, he said, but Randall's death forced him to abandon the truck. His words painted a portrait of a man who had lost his grip on reality, yet was chillingly methodical in his violence. The arrest and confession dominated headlines. In New Mexico, KRQE aired footage of the Sunport crime scene, blurred but still horrifying. In New Jersey, the Courier-Post ran tributes to Dabkowski, grappling with Sean's unverified abuse allegations. On X, true crime enthusiasts dissected the case, sharing grainy mugshots and debating whether Sean's 16-victim claim held any truth. For the victims' families, the news brought no closure, only pain. Jennifer's sister told reporters, "He took everything from us." As Sean sat in a Missouri jail awaiting extradition, the full weight of his actions was coming into focus. The law had caught him, but the battle for justice was just beginning.
Sean Lannon's trials and sentencing. With Sean Lannon in custody in St. Louis on March 10, 2021, the gruesome trail of his crimes, 5 murders across New Mexico and New Jersey, was finally coming to light. The bodies of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Motta, Matthew Miller, and Randall Apostolon had been found in a pickup truck in Albuquerque, while Michael Dabkowski's bludgeoned body lay in his East Greenwich home. Sean's chilling confession, including his unverified claim of 16 total victims, left investigators scrambling and the public reeling. But the story of Sean Lannon wasn't over. As he sat in a jail cell, the wheels of justice began to turn. A complex process spanning 2 states, multiple trials, and years of legal battles. From 2021 to 2024, Sean faced the consequences of his actions. But for the families of his victims, the courtroom offered little solace for the pain he'd inflicted. Sean's legal journey began with extradition. New Jersey, where he'd killed Dabkowski, took priority due to the fresh crime scene and strong evidence. By late March 2021, he was transferred to a Gloucester County jail, his mugshot, a gaunt, hollow-eyed image plastered across news outlets. The New Jersey case moved quickly. Prosecutors charged him for first-degree murder for Dabkowski's death, along with theft for stealing the SUV. Sean's defense team, grasping for mitigation, leaned on his claim of childhood abuse by Dabkowski, arguing it drove him to a provocation of passion. But the evidence was thin. No records, no witnesses, just Sean's word. In October 2022, after months of negotiations, Sean took a plea deal to avoid a trial. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving a 35-year sentence without parole. The judge was blunt. "You are a danger to society." For Dabkowski's loved ones, the sentence felt hollow. "He was a good man," a friend told the Courier Post. "Sean's lies don't change that." Meanwhile, New Mexico was building its case. The Albuquerque truck discovery had uncovered 4 bodies, and the forensic evidence, blood, DNA, and Sean's own confessions tied him to the murders of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller, and Randall Apostolon. Extradited to New Mexico in early 2023, Sean faced a mountain of charges: 4 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and more. The complexity of the case, spanning multiple crime scenes and jurisdictions, slowed the process. Prosecutors in New Mexico were methodical, piecing together timelines from phone records, witness statements, and Sean's chillingly detailed confessions. His claim of 16 victims, though, remained a dead end. Despite extensive searches in Grants and surrounding areas, no additional bodies or missing persons reports corroborated his boast. Investigators began to suspect it was a ploy for attention, a way to inflate his infamy. The New Mexico trials were split for efficiency. The murder of Randall Apostolon, tied directly to the truck, went first. In May 2024, Sean pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for Apostolon's death, receiving a 15-year sentence to run consecutively with his New Jersey term. The plea spared Randall's family a grueling trial, but the pain lingered. "He was just trying to survive," a relative told Fox 13. Why him? The remaining 3 murders, Jennifer, Justin, and Matthew, were bundled into a single case. Prosecutors painted Sean as a calculating predator, driven by revenge, drugs, and paranoia. His defense tried to argue diminished capacity, citing his methamphetamine addiction and emotional turmoil post-divorce. But the evidence was overwhelming: gunshot wounds, dismembered bodies, and Sean's own words describing the killings in cold detail. In June 2024, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder, receiving 45 years consecutive for each count, effectively ensuring he'd never leave prison. The sentencing hearings were a raw display of grief. Jennifer's sister took the stand, her voice trembling as she described the void left by her death. "You took a mother from her children," she said, staring at Sean, who kept his eyes on the floor. Friends of Justin and Matthew spoke of lives cut short, dreams unfulfilled. Even Randall's estranged family, scattered across the Southwest, sent letters begging for justice. Sean offered no apologies, only a brief statement: "I lost control." The judge was unmoved, calling the crimes heinous and noting Sean's lack of remorse. By the end of 2024, his total sentence, 95 years across both states, guaranteed he'd die behind bars. At 50 years old, Sean Lannon's life was over, confined to a cell where his claims of 16 victims echoed as a haunting, unproven taunt.
The gavel fell in a New Mexico courtroom in June 2024, sealing Sean Lannon's fate. 95 years behind bars for the murders of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller, Randall Apostolon, and Michael Dabkowski. At 50 years old, the man who'd once been a father, a handyman, and a neighbor in the small town of Grants was now a convicted killer.
his name synonymous with a trail of blood that stretched from New Mexico to New Jersey. The trials were over, the headlines fading, but the scars left by his actions ran deep. For the families of his victims, the communities he shattered, and a nation gripped by the horror of his crimes, the question lingered. What does it mean when an ordinary man becomes a monster? As the dust settled, the Sean Lannon case left behind not just grief, but haunting lessons about human nature, justice, and the shadows that can hide in plain sight. Jennifer Lannon's death tore a hole in her family. Her 3 children, now in foster care, faced a future without their mother or father. Her sister, speaking to KRQE after the sentencing, described the pain of explaining Jennifer's absence to the kids. "They keep asking when she's coming back," she said, her voice breaking. "How do you tell them she's never coming home?" Justin Mata and Matthew Miller, though less known to the public, left their own voids. Justin's friends in Grants remembered him as a troubled but kind soul, caught in the same drug world that ensnared Sean. Matthew, just 21, was mourned by classmates who saw him as a kid with potential, cut down before he could find his path. Randall Apostolon's death, though less personal to Sean, struck a chord with those who knew him as a drifter just trying to survive. He was invisible to most, a cousin told Fox 13, but he didn't deserve to die like that. In New Jersey, Michael Debkowski's community grappled with the loss of a man they saw as a mentor, his reputation clouded by Sean's unproven abuse allegations. The case's ripple effects went beyond the victims' families. In Grants, a town of just 9,000, trust eroded. Neighbors who'd once waved to Sean now locked their doors, haunted by the fact that a killer had lived among them. The house where Jennifer, Justin, and Matthew were murdered became a local legend, its windows dark, its yard overgrown. In East Greenwich, New Jersey, the Big Brothers Big Sisters program faced scrutiny, despite no evidence supporting Sean's claims against Debkowski. The organization issued a statement in 2021 reaffirming its commitment to child safety, but the shadow of the case lingered. Sean's claim of 16 victims, though unverified, fueled endless speculation. On X, posts from 2024 to 2025 showed true crime fans debating whether more bodies were hidden in the New Mexico desert. "He's either a liar or a serial killer we barely scratched," one user wrote, garnering thousands of likes. Police searched abandoned properties in Grants and beyond, but found nothing. The claim, like much of Sean's story, seemed designed to provoke, to keep his name in the spotlight. Yet it raised a chilling question. How well do we know those around us? Sean wasn't a drifter or a loner. He was a father who took his kids to school, a man who fixed cars for neighbors. His crimes exposed the fragility of normalcy, showing how rage, addiction, and unresolved pain could turn a familiar face into a predator. The case's cultural impact was undeniable. By 2025, a YouTube documentary, "Cops Discover Truck Full of Dead Bodies," had racked up millions of views, its grainy body cam recreations and chilling narration feeding a true crime obsession. Podcasts like "They Will Kill You" dissected Sean's psychology,
pointing to his methamphetamine use and post-divorce spiral as catalysts. But no explanation felt complete. Was it revenge, as prosecutors argued, tied to his bitter split with Jennifer? Was it paranoia, amplified by drugs? Or did the roots lie deeper in a childhood trauma that, true or not, shaped his worldview? The answers remain elusive, locked in Sean's mind as he sits in a prison cell, his life reduced to concrete walls and silence. For the victims' families, justice offered no closure. The 95-year sentence ensured Sean would never walk free, but it couldn't erase the pain. He took everything, Jennifer's sister told reporters. No prison term fixes that. The case left a broader lesson. The systems meant to catch people like Sean, police, social services, community networks, failed until it was too late. Could early intervention, perhaps for his addiction or domestic issues, have stopped him? The question hangs heavy, a reminder that monsters aren't born in a vacuum. They're shaped by choices, circumstances, and the moments when no one steps in.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. The sun has just slipped below the horizon, painting the sky a fading orange over the sprawling desert. On the top level of the Albuquerque International Sunport parking garage, the air is cool and still, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A lone parking attendant weaves through the scattered cars, her flashlight beam dancing across the concrete. She's used to the quiet of the evening shift, the occasional clatter of a loose shopping cart, or the distant rumble of a plane taking off. But tonight, something feels off. As she rounds the far corner of the garage, a sour, metallic stench hits her nose. It's subtle at first, like rotting food left too long in the sun. She shrugs it off, thinking it's just trash. But as she approaches a rusted, beat-up pickup truck parked at an odd angle, the smell grows stronger, sharp, heavy, and wrong. Her stomach churns. Something about this truck doesn't belong here. She hesitates, her hand hovering over her radio. The truck's windows are smudged, the paint chipped, and it's parked carelessly, taking up 2 spaces. The odor is unbearable now, clawing at her throat. She calls it in, her voice tight with unease. "I've got a suspicious vehicle up here," she says, trying to sound calm. Within minutes, Albuquerque police roll into the garage, their patrol cars casting red and blue shadows across the concrete walls. An officer steps out, his boots echoing in the silence. He approaches the truck, flashlight in hand, expecting maybe a stolen vehicle or some petty crime. The stench hits him like a wall, thick, putrid, like death itself. He gags, covering his mouth, but presses forward. Peering through the driver's side window, he freezes. In the passenger seat, slumped under a stained tarp, is a body, motionless, unnaturally still. His pulse races as he radios for backup. "We've got a body here," he says, his voice cracking. He doesn't know it yet, but this is only the beginning of a nightmare. The officers gather, their faces tense. They move to the back of the truck, a beat-up Ford registered to Randall Apostolon, a 60-year-old drifter who lived out of his vehicle, taking odd jobs to survive. The tailgate creaks as they force it open. The smell explodes, a rancid wave that sends one cop stumbling back, coughing. In the truck bed, stacked like forgotten cargo, are 3 large plastic totes, the kind you'd use for storage. But these aren't holding old clothes or holiday decorations. An officer, his hands trembling, pries open the first tote. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic and duct tape, are human remains, chopped up, decomposing, swarming with flies. The sight is grotesque, almost unreal. The second tote reveals more body parts, crudely dismembered. The third is the same. 3 bodies, hacked apart and stuffed into containers like garbage. The garage erupts into chaos. Radios blare, officers shout, and the wail of sirens grows louder in the distance. 4 bodies in total. 1 in the front seat, 3 in the totes. The police are stunned, their training barely holding them together. This is no ordinary crime scene, one detective mutters, his face drained of color. Later, through dental records and DNA, the victims are identified. Jennifer Lannon, 39, a mother of 3 from Grants, New Mexico. Justin Mata, 40, a man tied to a rough crowd. Matthew Miller, just 21, with his whole life ahead of him. And Randall Apostolon, the truck's owner, now a victim himself. The question burns in everyone's mind. Who could do this? The answer points to one man, Sean Lannon, a 47-year-old father and ex-husband from a small town in New Mexico. A man who seemed ordinary, someone you might pass in a grocery store without a second glance. But Sean Lannon was no ordinary man. In a matter of weeks, he left a trail of blood across 2 states, killing 5 people and later claiming, in a chilling confession, that he'd taken 16 lives in total. This is the story of a case that shocked a nation, not just for its brutality, but for how it shattered the illusion of normalcy. Sean Lannon wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in alleys. He was a father, a neighbor, a man with a past that festered until it exploded. From a messy divorce to a truck filled with corpses, his descent into darkness raises haunting questions. Was it revenge, drugs, or a deeper wound from his childhood? How did he evade suspicion until that fateful night in Albuquerque? The case gripped the world when it broke in 2021, fueled by raw police footage and a YouTube documentary that exploded online by 2025, racking up millions of views. On platforms like X, true crime fans dissected every detail, from Lannon's cryptic claim of 16 victims to the image of that truck, parked like a silent confession. By 2024, he faced justice, sentenced to life without parole. But to understand how it all began, we need to go back to a small town in New Mexico, where a man named Sean Lannon started down a path of no return.
The Albuquerque parking garage, with its grim cargo of 4 bodies, was just the endpoint of a story that began decades earlier in a quiet corner of South Jersey. To understand how Sean Lannon, a seemingly ordinary man, became the architect of such horror, we need to trace his steps back to the beginning, back to a childhood that held the first seeds of darkness. In the small town of Carneys Point, New Jersey, in the 1970s, a boy named Sean grew up in a world that, on the surface, looked unremarkable. But beneath the surface, something was brewing, something that would fester for years, unnoticed, until it erupted in a trail of blood across 2 states. Sean Michael Lannon was born on March 3, 1974, in a working-class neighborhood where life revolved around family, school, and the hum of small-town routine. His parents, a truck driver and a homemaker, raised him and his siblings in a modest home, the kind with peeling paint and a cluttered garage. Neighbors would later describe the Lannons as normal enough, not wealthy, not troubled, just another family scraping by. But normalcy can be a fragile mask. Young Sean was a quiet kid, often lost in his own thoughts, with a mop of dark hair and eyes that seemed to carry a weight beyond his years. School reports painted him as average, not a troublemaker, but not a star either. He blended in, the kind of kid who could slip through the cracks. And that's exactly what he did. In the early 1980s, when Sean was around 10, his parents enrolled him in Big Brothers Big Sisters, a mentorship program meant to guide at-risk kids. It was here that he met Michael Dobkowski, a charismatic man in his late 20s, who would become a pivotal figure in Sean's life, and years later, his final victim. Dobkowski, a respected community member with a knack for connecting with kids, took Sean under his wing. They went fishing, played catch, and talked about life. To outsiders, it was a picture-perfect mentorship. But Sean would later claim, in a chilling courtroom confession, that this relationship was far from innocent. He alleged that Debkowski abused him sexually starting at age 14, a trauma that he said scarred him for life. Investigators dug into these claims decades later, combing through records and interviewing family members, but found no concrete evidence, no police reports, no witnesses, nothing to corroborate the story. Was it a genuine wound that shaped Lannon's rage, or a calculated lie to justify his crimes? The truth remains murky, a shadow hanging over his early years. By his teens, Sean was drifting. High school friends remembered him as likable, but distant, the kind of guy who'd share a laugh, but never let you get too close. He dabbled in petty trouble, skipping class, sneaking beers, but nothing that raised red flags. After graduating in 1992, he bounced between odd jobs, construction, auto repair, anything that paid. New Jersey's tight-knit community started to feel stifling, and in his early 20s, Sean left for a fresh start in New Mexico. Grants, a dusty town of 9,000 along Route 66, became his new home. It was here in the early 2000s that he met Jennifer Whitman, a warm, spirited woman who'd become his wife, and years later, his first victim. Sean and Jennifer married in the mid-2000s, settling into a small house in Grants. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and for a while, life seemed stable. Sean worked as a handyman, fixing cars or doing odd jobs, while Jennifer cared for the kids. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Friends noticed Sean's temper, especially when money was tight. He started using methamphetamine, a drug that was sinking its claws into Grants's underbelly. The marriage frayed. Arguments turned physical, with police called to their home more than once for domestic disputes. By 2020, Jennifer filed for divorce, citing Sean's volatility and drug use. The split was messy, with custody battles and bitter accusations. Sean moved out, renting a rundown apartment, while Jennifer stayed in the family home. Alone, broke, and spiraling, Sean's resentment grew, not just toward Jennifer, but toward others in his orbit, friends, dealers, anyone he felt had wronged him. This was the Sean Lannon of early 2021, a 47-year-old man, estranged from his wife, estranged from stability, and haunted by a past he couldn't escape. His childhood, marked by an unproven claim of abuse, left a lingering question. Did those years shape a killer, or was Lannon always wired for violence? His drug use, financial ruin, and broken marriage were kindling, waiting for a spark. That spark would come in January 2021, when Sean Lannon made a choice that would set him on a collision course with horror. The man who once blended into the background was about to step into the spotlight, not as a father or a neighbor, but as a predator whose actions would leave a small town reeling and the nation stunned.
The murder of Jennifer Lannon. The desert town of Grants, New Mexico is a place where life moves slowly, where the hum of Route 66 and the vast, open sky feel like constants in an unchanging world. In early January 2021, in a modest single-story house on a quiet street, that illusion of calm was shattered. This was the home of Jennifer Lannon, a 39-year-old mother of 3, a woman known for her warm smile and fierce love for her children. But it was also the place where Sean Lannon, her estranged ex-husband, would take his first step into an abyss of violence. The murder of Jennifer Lannon wasn't just the beginning of a killing spree. It was the spark that ignited a fire that would consume 5 lives and leave a trail of horror across 2 states. Jennifer Whitman Lannon was a fixture in Grants. She was the kind of person who'd stop to chat at the grocery store, her laugh carrying across the room. After her divorce from Sean in 2020, she was rebuilding her life, raising their 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son, in the family home. Money was tight, and the divorce had been ugly, with arguments over custody and finances that left both sides raw. Jennifer had moved on, or at least she was trying to. She'd started spending time with new friends, including Justin Mata and Matthew Miller, men who'd later cross paths with Sean's rage. But in early January, when Sean showed up at her doorstep, Jennifer likely didn't see a killer. She saw the father of her children, a man she'd once loved, now worn down by drugs and bitterness. What exactly happened that night in January 2021 remains locked in the walls of that house, pieced together only by Sean's later confessions and the grim evidence left behind. According to court documents, Sean arrived at Jennifer's home under the pretense of talking, maybe about the kids, maybe about money. The conversation turned heated, as it often did. Jennifer, never one to back down, likely pushed back against Sean's demands or accusations. What started as words escalated into something far darker. Sean, fueled by a toxic mix of resentment, methamphetamine, and a festering sense of betrayal, pulled a gun. It wasn't a moment of impulse, prosecutors would later argue. It was cold, deliberate. A single gunshot to the chest ended Jennifer's life. Her body crumpled to the floor of her own living room, the place where she'd read bedtime stories to her children. Sean didn't panic. He didn't flee. Instead, he stayed in the house, staring at the body of the woman he'd once vowed to love. What went through his mind in those moments? Was it regret, rage, or something colder? Whatever it was, Sean made a chilling choice. He didn't call for help or try to cover his tracks in a hurry. He dragged Jennifer's body to a corner of the house, likely the garage, and left it there, hidden under blankets or tarps. For days, maybe even weeks, he kept her there, a secret he carried as he moved through Grants, interacting with neighbors, maybe even seeing his kids. The house, once a place of family life, became a tomb, a grim precursor to the truck where Jennifer's body would later be found. The police didn't know about Jennifer's death right away. She was reported missing in late January when friends noticed her absence. Her phone went unanswered, her social media silent. In a small town like Grants, word spreads fast, and concern grew. But Sean was already moving on to his next targets, his mind set on erasing anyone he saw as a threat or a loose end. Jennifer's body, left in the house, was the first piece of a grotesque puzzle. It would later be moved, dismembered, and stuffed into a plastic tote, a fate she'd share with 2 others. The brutality of it shocked even seasoned investigators. This wasn't just a murder, one detective later said in court. It was a statement. Why did Sean kill Jennifer? Prosecutors pointed to a tangle of motives, a bitter divorce, disputes over their children, and Sean's belief that Jennifer was moving on with her life, perhaps with new relationships that threatened his control. His methamphetamine use, which had spiraled since the divorce, likely amplified his paranoia and rage. But there was something else, something personal. In his confessions, Sean hinted at a deeper betrayal, though he never elaborated. Did he see Jennifer as the root of his failures, the one who'd taken his family and stability? Or was she simply the first person in his path when his darkness took over? Whatever the reason, her death marked a point of no return. Sean Lannon wasn't just a man scorned, he was a man unmoored, ready to kill again. As Jennifer's body lay hidden in that Grant's home, Sean was already planning his next move. The friends she'd grown close to, Justin Mata and Matthew Miller, were about to become his next targets. The house, now a crime scene, was just the beginning.
Sean's descent was accelerating, and the quiet streets of Grants were about to witness a horror that would ripple far beyond New Mexico.
Justin Mata and Matthew Miller. The small town of Grants, New Mexico, was still reeling from Jennifer Lannon's disappearance in late January 2021, though no one yet knew she lay dead in her own home, hidden by her ex-husband, Sean Lannon. The quiet streets, lined with modest houses and sun-bleached lawns, held no hint of the horror unfolding in their midst. Sean, now 47, was no longer just a bitter ex-husband or a man struggling with methamphetamine addiction. He had crossed the line with Jennifer's murder, and the darkness within him was growing. In the days and weeks that followed, 2 more lives would be snuffed out in the same house where Jennifer died. Justin Mata, 40, and Matthew Miller, just 21, were about to become the next victims in Sean Lannon's chilling rampage, their bodies destined to join Jennifer's in a gruesome fate. Justin Mata was a familiar face in Grants, a man who lived on the fringes of the town's social scene. At 40, he was known for his rough edges, a drifter who dabbled in the local drug trade, particularly methamphetamine, the same drug that had its hooks in Sean. Justin and Jennifer had been close, maybe too close for Sean's liking. Some whispered they were more than friends, though no one could say for sure. What was clear was that Justin owed Sean money, a debt tied to their shared world of drugs and desperation. In late January, days after Jennifer's murder, Sean lured Justin to the house on the pretext of settling their accounts. It was a trap. Inside the familiar walls of the home where Sean had once lived with his family, the conversation turned deadly. According to Sean's later confession, Justin never saw it coming. A gunshot rang out, likely the same weapon used on Jennifer, and Justin collapsed. His life ended in an instant. But Sean wasn't done. The act of killing was no longer enough. He needed to erase his victims entirely. In a chilling display of calculation, he dragged Justin's body to the garage, where Jennifer's remains still lay hidden. There, in the dim light of a bare bulb, Sean took a saw, possibly a hacksaw or power tool, investigators later speculated, and began dismembering Justin's body. Arms, legs, torso, all cut apart with methodical precision. The pieces were wrapped in plastic, stuffed into a large storage tote, and sealed with duct tape. Blood stained the concrete floor, though Sean was careful to clean what he could. To him, Justin wasn't just a victim. He was a problem to be disposed of, a loose end tied to his crumbling world of debts and drugs. Days later, Sean set his sights on Matthew Miller, a young man barely out of his teens. At 21, Matthew was an unlikely target, a kid with a boyish grin who'd grown close to Jennifer in the months after her divorce. Some said he was her new boyfriend, others just a friend who checked in on her and the kids. To Sean, Matthew's connection to Jennifer was a threat. Perhaps he knew too much, or perhaps Sean's paranoia, fueled by meth, painted him as an enemy. Whatever the reason, Sean lured Matthew to the house under a similar ruse, a friendly chat, maybe a drink. The details are sparse, pieced together from Sean's confessions and forensic evidence, but the outcome was the same. Another gunshot, another body. Matthew, like Justin, was shot in the chest, his life cut short before he could even fight back. And like Justin, his body was dragged to the garage, dismembered, and stuffed into a second plastic tote. The garage, once a place for tools and kids' bikes, was now a slaughterhouse, its walls hiding 3 bodies: Jennifer, Justin, and Matthew. Sean's actions were methodical, almost mechanical. He didn't bury the bodies or dump them in some remote desert wash, as many killers might.
Instead, he kept them close, hidden in the house for weeks. Neighbors later told police they noticed nothing unusual. No screams, no strange smells, just Sean coming and going as if nothing had changed. His ability to compartmentalize was chilling. He'd pick up his kids for visits, nod to neighbors, and carry on with the facade of a normal life, all while 3 corpses lay in his former home. But keeping the bodies there was risky. Sean knew he'd need to move them eventually, to cover his tracks and keep his secrets buried. That plan would soon involve another man, another victim, and a truck that would carry this horror to Albuquerque.
In late February 2021, the small town of Grants, New Mexico, remained blissfully unaware of the horrors hidden within one of its unassuming homes. 3 bodies, Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, and Matthew Miller, lay dismembered and concealed in plastic totes in Sean Lannon's former garage, a grim secret known only to the man who put them there. But Sean, now 47 and spiraling deeper into his own darkness, faced a problem. The bodies couldn't stay in Grants forever. The risk of discovery was growing, and the stench of decay was becoming harder to mask. He needed a plan to move them, to bury his crimes in a place where no one would look. That plan would lead him to Randall Apostolin, a 60-year-old drifter whose own desperation would pull him into Sean's deadly orbit. What began as a transaction would end in betrayal, and a 4th body added to the toll. Randall Apostolin was a man on the margins, a familiar figure in the underbelly of Albuquerque, about an hour's drive from Grants. He lived out of his battered Ford pickup truck, a rusted relic filled with the clutter of a nomadic life, blankets, tools, and empty coffee cups. At 60, Randall was weathered but scrappy, taking odd jobs to survive, hauling scrap, moving furniture, whatever paid in cash. He was no stranger to the rougher side of life, and his path had crossed Sean's in the murky world of drugs and favors. To Sean, Randall was the perfect mark, a man who wouldn't ask too many questions, who'd take a job for a quick buck, no matter how shady. In late February, Sean approached Randall with an offer. He needed help moving some stuff to a storage unit in Albuquerque. The pay was modest, somewhere between $100 and $200, court records later revealed. But for Randall, it was enough. He agreed, unaware that the cargo he'd be hauling was far from ordinary. On February 24, 2021, Randall drove his truck to Grants, pulling up to Sean's old house under the cover of night. The details of their meeting are pieced together from Sean's confessions and forensic evidence, but the scene was likely tense. Sean, high on methamphetamine and increasingly paranoid, was on edge. He directed Randall to load 3 heavy plastic totes into the truck bed, claiming they were filled with household junk. Randall, used to moving all kinds of cargo, didn't pry, at least not at first. The totes were heavy, their contents shifting awkwardly as he and Sean hefted them into the truck. The air carried a faint, sour smell, but Randall, perhaps distracted by the promise of cash, didn't press. They drove toward Albuquerque, the totes secured in the back, Sean riding shotgun, his eyes darting nervously. Somewhere along the way, things went wrong. Randall, perhaps sensing something off about the job, began to ask questions. Maybe he noticed the smell growing stronger, or maybe he caught a glimpse of something through a gap in the plastic. Court documents suggest he demanded more money, threatening to open the totes or go to the police. To Sean, this was a betrayal, a threat to his carefully constructed house of cards. In a deserted parking lot near Albuquerque, the situation exploded. Sean, always carrying a weapon, pulled out a small sledgehammer, a tool he'd likely brought for emergencies. The argument turned violent in an instant. Randall, older and slower, didn't stand a chance. Sean struck him repeatedly, the hammer cracking against skull and bone. Blood spattered the truck's interior, pooling on the passenger seat. Randall Apostolin, a man who'd survived decades on the fringes, was dead. Sean didn't hesitate. He dragged Randall's body to the passenger seat, draping it with a tarp to hide the carnage. The 3 totes, containing the remains of Jennifer, Justin, and Matthew, remained untouched in the truck bed. Sean drove on, his mind racing. He needed a place to ditch the truck, somewhere it wouldn't draw attention for a while. The Albuquerque International Sunport parking garage, with its sprawling levels and constant flow of travelers, was perfect. He parked Randall's truck on the top level, far from prying eyes, and walked away. The vehicle, now a rolling tomb, held 4 bodies, 3 dismembered in totes, 1 slumped in the front seat. Sean caught a flight out of Albuquerque the next day, February 25, 2021, heading to Philadelphia with his 3 children, leaving the truck and its gruesome cargo behind.
On March 5, 2021, the Albuquerque International Sunport parking garage stood quiet under the New Mexico dusk, its concrete levels bathed in the faint glow of overhead lights. The bustle of travelers below seemed a world away from the top floor, where rusted pickup trucks sat alone, parked crookedly in a shadowed corner. For over a week it had gone unnoticed, just another vehicle in a sea of cars. But something was wrong. A parking attendant, making her routine rounds, caught a whiff of a foul odor, sharp, sickly, like rotting meat left too long in the sun. She'd smelled it before, faintly, but tonight it was overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Her stomach twisted as she traced the stench to the truck, its chipped paint and smudged windows giving nothing away. Unease crept over her. This wasn't trash or a dead animal. This was something far worse. She radioed for help, her voice tight with apprehension. "There's a truck up here. It smells bad." Within minutes, Albuquerque police arrived, their patrol cars casting flickering red and blue lights across the garage. An officer approached, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. The smell hit him like a punch. Rancid, heady, a stench that clung to the back of his throat. He peered through the driver's side window, expecting perhaps a homeless person or stolen goods. Instead, he saw a figure slumped in the passenger seat, draped in a stained tarp. The officer's pulse quickened. "We've got a body," he radioed, his voice unsteady. He didn't know it yet, but he was standing at the edge of one of the most gruesome crime scenes in New Mexico's history. The truck belonged to Randall Apostolon, a 60-year-old drifter whose life ended violently just days earlier. As more officers arrived, they moved to the truck bed, their faces grim. The odor was unbearable now, a suffocating wave that forced even veteran cops to cover their mouths. With gloved hands, they pried open the tailgate. Inside were 3 large plastic totes, the kind you'd find in any hardware store, stacked neatly like moving boxes. But these held no household goods. An officer opened the first tote, and the sight made him stagger back. Human remains, dismembered, wrapped in plastic, crawling with flies, spilled into view. The second tote was the same. So was the third. Body parts, hacked apart and stuffed into containers, had been rotting for weeks. The garage erupted into chaos. Radios crackled. Officers shouted for forensics, and the distant wail of sirens grew louder. 4 bodies in total, 1 in the front seat, 3 in the totes. The passenger was Randall Apostolon, killed by blunt force trauma, his skull crushed by a sledgehammer. The totes held the remains of Jennifer Lannon, 39, a mother from Grants; Justin Mata, 40, a small-time drug dealer; and Matthew Miller, just 21, a young man caught in the wrong place. Forensic teams worked through the night, their faces pale under the harsh garage lights. "This is the worst thing I've ever seen," one detective told reporters later, his voice hollow. Identifying the bodies was a grim task. Dental records and DNA confirmed the victims' names, but the condition of the remains, chopped up, decomposing, spoke of a brutality that stunned even seasoned investigators. The totes were sealed with duct tape, the bodies wrapped in layers of plastic, as if the killer had tried to erase their existence. The Albuquerque Police Department launched a frantic investigation. The truck, registered to Apostolon, offered few clues at first. Bloodstains in the cab pointed to a violent struggle, and the totes were meticulously packed, suggesting a calculated mind. But who could do this? The answer came quickly. Sean Lannon, a 47-year-old from Grants, was already on their radar. Jennifer's family had reported her missing in late January, and whispers in Grants tied Sean to her disappearance. Police learned he'd been seen with Apostolon's truck before it appeared at the Sunport. Flight records showed he'd left Albuquerque on February 25th, catching a plane to Philadelphia with his 3 children, leaving the truck behind. The pieces were falling into place, but the scale of the crime was staggering. The discovery sent shockwaves through Albuquerque. Local news outlets swarmed the story, their headlines screaming of a truck of horrors. On X, posts from early March 2021 captured the public's disbelief, with users sharing grainy photos of the cordoned-off garage and speculating about a serial killer. For the families of the victims, the news was a gut punch. Jennifer's relatives, already worried by her silence, learned of her fate through a TV broadcast. "She didn't deserve this," her sister told KRQE, her voice breaking. The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was clear: Sean Lannon wasn't done. As police in New Mexico pieced together the crime scene, Sean was already in New Jersey, setting the stage for his final act of violence.